Yes.
I think the question about international courts, particularly in reference to cholera, one of the things we found that the sheer of cholera, leaving tens of thousands of people dead, became an issue for local NGOs interested in human rights concerns. And so Bureau des Avocats and Boston International Justice in Haiti have both brought cases around cholera. Because of the, in some ways, because Haiti has been marginalized in mainstream media discourse, the issue of the deaths caused by MINUSTA has not been taken up by many newspapers. There are some exceptions to that, the Miami Herald. There are some political exceptions to that, Maxine Waters. But the issue of cholera is so huge by comparison. The issue of the earthquake is huge compared to the numbers killed. And so we have found that these deaths, and one of the reasons we were attracted to it, has been marginalized, has been sidelined in mainstream discourse. And so for us, it's quite important to keep this issue from disappearing.
And that links with another question that's come up there, is how can we help you to put pressure on the UN? And I think the most direct is to write to Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping, and to Secretary General Guterres, and ask them to look into this, to send the most simplest thing, send a team to Bourneuf and the other neighborhoods, but Bourneuf is where we set the film, and ask them to meet with people, have a look, investigate. If you have a problem trying to find the email for Jean-Pierre Lacroix or Secretary General Guterres, just email us via the website. It's stayswithyou.com. It shouldn't be difficult to find. It's usually the person's name at un.org, but it might be a bit different for Guterres. But anyway, I have those emails, so just contact me and I'll give you those emails. And the more pressure, I think, directly on those agents, and you could try the human rights bodies as well, special rapporteurs. Ask them, the special rapporteur on extrajudicial killing. She would be a good source, Agnes Calamar, to ask her to investigate. I think that's all that can be done. Other than, of course, raising the other, that's not all that can be. The other thing that can be done is drawing attention to the issue by talking about it, by raising it in discussions, sharing what you know about it, sharing the film and any other sources of information, and gathering information to and presenting it to the UN and within academic and practice-based circles.
I think because our film was made 2 years ago, we did have some what you can do little boxes on the website. It stayswithyou.com, but because of time passing, we've removed those. But I think what we can do maybe overnight is ask a web designer, we can put up some of those emails for Agnes Calamar, Special Rapporteur, for Guterres and other people. We can put their emails up on the website, which will probably appear at some point tomorrow. So if any of you feel motivated, it would be great to keep following this up and not let the dust settle.
There are a couple of more questions here. One is, have any of the victims attempted to start legal proceedings against either the UN or the true contributing country? And the answer is yes and no. That none of the people that we spoke to in Cité Soleil has attempted to bring a claim themselves. And I think that's understandable because they don't really have the resources to bring a claim themselves. And they wouldn't know, it's quite difficult to bring a claim against the UN. So none of them have tried to do so themselves. There were complaints were brought, broad-based complaints, I mean, not naming specific individuals. In 2005, human rights group, International Justice for Democracy in Haiti, and a number of associated groups wrote to the Inter-American Court. I think it was the Inter-American Court. It might have been the Inter-American Commission. It was one of those. And seeking, asking the Commission and Court to investigate. I think they were seeking interim protection orders. So far as I'm aware, they didn't get anywhere with that. In that I have not found or seen a response. We did meet with a number of lawyers when we were in Haiti and talk to them about it. But one of the difficulties that they said they had was that UN peacekeeping rules of engagement are classified, and therefore it usually takes a long time after the mission has finished or has begun to wind down for anybody outside of the UN itself to find what those rules of engagement are. So if they bring a complaint locally, if a local lawyer in Port-au-Prince they said that they've brought a complaint to the mission simply said, well, we are complying with our rules of engagement. And since those are classified and the lawyers can't look at what those rules of engagement and determine whether or not they were in compliance, and since the rules of engagement don't specify compliance with human rights law, it was very difficult for lawyers to bring claims on that issue. It's been easier, well, it's not been easy, it's been difficult, but that problem doesn't arise in situations like bringing a claim for negligence with cholera, because it's not linked, because there are no circumstances when spreading cholera is legitimate, whereas the UN mission can argue that, well, there are certain circumstances, it was all self-defense. In our view, it is not plausible to argue that all of that destruction could be self-defense, or that firing from helicopters is self-defense. But without a clear basis of law on which to challenge, it was difficult for local lawyers to bring those claims. And I think there wasn't even at that time clarity on what UN human rights obligations were. I think they've always been there, but it wasn't something that had been pushed or addressed. So it wouldn't have been easy for local lawyers to bring those claims.
I think Michelle's question about an evaluation, we did take this film to the United Nations Human Rights Commission side event in Geneva. And there was a kind of a ripple of influence that we were made aware of. One of the officers said that the film had been watched, it had been considered. There was an internal requirement for all records on those operations to be opened up and shared. But then that little kind of door opening appears to have been closed again, and we've heard nothing back. One of the things that we heard was that the documents from MINUSTAH were kept in some sort of a container somewhere in New York, but that they had lost the keys. So there's a number of attempts to kind of both open but then close down such an evaluation, and it's been very disappointing in the sense that none of that evaluation has been made public or transparent. These were kind of not quite rumors, but we were told there was serious attempt within the UN to evaluate, but that never appeared to have gone anywhere further than that. The United Nations, we have heard, and this is not just about the MINUSTAH operations around sexual violence in Africa and other things. There is a very, very strong kind of curtain within the United Nations not to speak to outside bodies, outside media, outside investigations, researchers. And certainly we're aware that there was an evaluation started, but we have no response as to how far that has gone.
Yeah, my sense is that somewhere within the UN Department of Peacekeeping, there is a very strong reluctance to examine this further. All the more so now that the mission is drawn down, can move on, push it aside. There is, although there were individual lawyers that I spoke to in the UN who were willing to meet me for coffee and talk off the record, trying to persuade the UN as an institution to look at this issue, proved, well, it has so far proved a huge wall. They've simply refused to respond, not to act, and have just not answered emails or phone calls. So I think that problem of I'm just trying to think of a way that within the UN there is a desire to, at least a strong element within it, to damp down criticism of the UN and put on a positive, successful front. I think whether or not that can be changed depends on how much the public and academics and everybody that wants to be involved tries to raise awareness of the issue. And one of the things that we're working on at the moment, because we got nowhere really pushing at the UN level, and because it was very difficult to work with this issue in Haiti now, the situation with COVID and the security situation is very bad, but also they have so many other problems to deal with, the cholera and the sexual abuse, that the issue of use of force was quite a small compared with all the other problems. And yet for the people who are affected, it's not small at all. And it's not small in the sense of what happens in other operations if this issue is not addressed. So we have been looking at, we went to Rio de Janeiro last year, autumn 2019, because a lot of MINUSTAH personnel are now serving in Brazil's government. And General Helena, who was in charge of one of the major operations that some of the participants talked about, where they lost their children, Operation Iron Forest on July 6, 2005, he is now Minister for Institutional Security in Brazil. And during the election campaign, Bolsonaro's election campaign, he gave a number of interviews on radio and on television talking about how they must apply the approach, the rules of engagement, and the flexible policies, as he describes it, of the mission, the MINUSTAH mission. They must apply those in the favelas in Rio to deal with gang crime. That was his aim, and that's what he's been doing. And over the last year, I think in Rio, 5 to 6 people, more than 5 people a day, have been killed by Rio's police. Sometimes it's police, and sometimes it's military police or the army carrying out policing functions. And General Heleno, in an interview, said quite explicitly that the rules of engagement in Haiti were very flexible, and we need to apply those rules in Rio. He even said that, that I don't know whether he will ever regret saying this on television, live television, but he said that the rules of engagement permitted using deadly force if the peacekeeper, at the judgment of whoever's in command of the local mission, if they saw them either assaulting or stealing cargo. I don't know of any law anywhere that permits a state to eliminate someone without trial or anything because they see them stealing cargo. But so we have been trying to raise awareness of this link between what the mission did in Haiti and what General Heleno has said they did. And it isn't just General Heleno, but he's been very outspoken, and he's also Minister for Institutional Security, so he has a strong role. And how this is being implemented in Brazil, because there's widespread criticism of the policing policies in Brazil in a way that has not happened in Haiti. So I think drawing attention to that link is another way of raising awareness, and maybe pushing. I mean, if you're going to make police and army accountable for these kind of approaches to dealing with gang crime in Rio, and they say, well, we're just following UN policy, then maybe, and our UN experience and UN rules of engagement, then maybe that might be one way of raising awareness of the importance of this issue.
I think Anisha's question about MINUSTA being brought to justice, one of the attractions for donor countries to send troops to United Nations peacekeeping operations is that they are immune from prosecution in the country that they operate. And so they can only be taken to court in the host country. And so we've seen around the issue of sexual violence, some French operations donating troops have been prosecuted back in France. We're not aware of any of this having happened around any of the operations in Haiti under MINUSTA. The issue of international courts is more complex, as maybe we alluded to earlier. Some of the organizations like Bureau des Avocats or the Institute for Justice in Haiti, based in Boston, have been taken up a lot of their energy, a lot of the resources around the question of cholera and the earthquake. So no one has had the resources or the opportunities to take them United Nations to international courts around the operations in Guanaf and other areas, unfortunately. I think Matt has got a question there.
Yeah. Matt has asked about the legacies and generational impact of the deaths, and what can be done to help support survivors. I think that is one of the most disturbing and upsetting aspects of doing this kind of work, to see people suffering, to hear their stories, and to see that it's a long-term issue of suffering from generation to generation. And it's not just us that have seen this. It's been written about. There's an article, I think 2018, 2019, that talks about long-term trauma in Haiti. Unfortunately, the name has gone from my mind.
On the website?
No, but I can find it.
We'll put it up on the website.
Well, I can't put the website, the actual article, but I'll put the details, because it's an academic article. You have to find the journal, but I can put it, yeah. So what can be done about it, I suppose, depends on what position you are in and what angle, how you can approach it. For us, raising awareness of the issue, using film to provide a platform for people to tell their stories, we hope is some way of contributing to not alleviating suffering, but in some way to contributing, allowing people to tell their story, to come out and contributing to changing the narrative. Of course, there are practical things that could be done to help survivors, but that requires an organizational effort and people to pay money, basically, to support the practical needs. Their houses are still destroyed, support, particularly right now in COVID, that it's very severe issues that have been, the landscape, the housing is poor, they have no fresh water, so of course all of these challenges are worse. There is also the issue of mental health and the need for better mental health support. Those would be something that we're not able to organize, but could be supported. For example, if you wanted to contribute, for example, organizations like International Justice and Democracy in Haiti, IJDH, they are probably doing work in that area. And there are also Haitian human rights groups, RNDDH, which is also doing work there. There are practical issues, and trying to send money to Haiti is quite difficult, except through money transfers. But that's probably something that you can work out.
I think I think, Matt, you touched on something there which makes Haiti quite distinctive. Our follow-on film in Rio, Right Now I Want to Scream, which ironically we screened 2 nights ago as part of Docs Island. If anyone didn't get to see that but might be interested in it, please do get in touch. There's more information about it on the website, the same website. One of the things that distinguishes Haiti, I think, is the lack of infrastructure. Even before the earthquake certainly finished off. But when we went to Buenos, when we went to Port-au-Prince, it was very difficult to find a kind of infrastructure that you get, certainly in the West and in Rio. So that when we went to Rio and worked there to make a similar film, there were community groups very well organized, very well resourced. There are paid people, there are volunteers, very articulate and resourceful. And it's much easier to have a longer term relationship after we leave. That was much, much more difficult in Haiti. The community groups that we worked with, and again, you can see on the website a kind of a follow-up set of short two-camera piece films. We tried to leave and work with community groups there about try to leave some resources, small cameras, maybe that they could continue that sort of work. It wasn't possible. We were told that if we had left those cameras there, people would have sold them to pay for food, to pay for a meal. And so instead we left some resources that would help people temporarily. The enormous problem in Haiti is infrastructure, and the infrastructure is so weak because Haiti has been never forgiven for being the first Black republic that overcame slavery. And today people will say that, even middle-class people in Haiti will say that. The first democratically elected government under Aristide was overthrown in 2 coups d'etats. The United States, unfortunately, is implicated in much of this. I was going to say deindustrialization. It's never been allowed to become an industrial society, a social democratic society. So it's a huge problem, Matt, an enormous problem. We will try and put up maybe some more resources on the website that people can go off and find out more information about and find ways to support. There's a really good Soros-funded focal cultural centre there that premiered the film, and they do a lot of important work locally at trying to encourage certainly cultural resources, facilities locally. Okay.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all very much for watching the film. Thank you very much for your questions. And the website is a place where you can go to and get more information. And Siobhan's web email address is there as well, if anyone wants to have any follow-on questions or suggestions. Thank you very much. And thank you, Maria Prince, for helping organize this event.
Thank you, all of you.